Okay, let's really get into this. Picture it. Foggy cobblestone streets, maybe some gaslight flickering, that kind of damp, thick air. We're going back, way back, into this really chilling mystery. Jack the Ripper, welcome to this deep dive.
Yeah, and we're tackling this by looking closely at this stack of material you've sent over. It's, one of history's most famous, maybe infamous unsolved cases.
Right.
And our goal today, sticking just to what's in these documents, is to sort of cut through all the myths, pull out the key facts, and maybe understand a bit better why this dark story from Victorian London still fascinates us so much.
Exactly. And we've got a bit of a roadmap based purely on this material. First, setting the scene, really understanding Whitechapel in 1888. Then focusing on the victims, the individuals of women often called the canonical five.
For crucial.
We'll look at the investigation itself, the huge hurdles they faced. Touch on the suspects that actually get mentioned in your sources.
Yeah, the ones named.
Explore those letters, the really famous ones. And then kind of step back and think about the legacy. Why are we still talking about this?
It's definitely a story with so many layers, loads of speculation over the years. But like you said, by focusing just on the information you've provided, we really want to give a clear picture of what your sources say happened, and importantly, maybe why they suggest it's still unsolved.
Okay, so let's start right there. The setting. Your sources paint a really bleak picture, don't they? Whitechapel, 1888.
Oh, absolutely. What jumps out straight away from this material is just how desperate the East End was compared to, say, the West End of London. Whitechapel wasn't just poor, it was incredibly crowded. You had these tenements, basically cramped, often rundown apartment buildings, packed with people.
Right.
And the sources mention rampant crime, lots of disease, real hunger. This wasn't just background detail. The material suggests these conditions were, well, fundamental to everything, the victims' lives, the killer's opportunities.
And for many women, their survival was incredibly difficult.
Yes, the sources point out that for many women, survival basically meant turning to prostitution on those very dangerous streets. It was a reflection of that extreme poverty and lack of options.
And the police trying to maintain order in all this.
Yeah.
Your sources really highlight the challenges they were up against, don't they? It wasn't like today at all.
Not even close. The sources detail some major problems. First, the police force itself was just stretched way too thin for such a huge, complex area. Then you've got the physical environment. The streets, especially in places like Whitechapel, were badly lit, mostly by gaslight. Imagine trying to spot someone or chase them at night in those conditions.
Really difficult.
Incredibly. Plus, the sources mention that communication and coordination between different police divisions wasn't great. Information could be slow to travel, which really hampered any kind of quick, unified response when the attacks happened.
And this environment, these challenges, they bring us to the real tragedy detailed in your sources.
Yeah.
The victims. The material talks about the canonical five. It feels important to focus on them as individuals.
Absolutely. These were real women. Your sources lay out the timelines starting late summer 1888. Marianne Nichols, she was found August 31st. And the descriptions in your material are stark. Throat slashed, abdomen mutilated.
Just awful.
Yeah.
Then only about a week later, September 8th, Annie Chapman is discovered. And your sources say her injuries were even more severe, like an escalation.
It certainly reads that way. Then September 30th, just a horrific date. 2 victims found hours apart. Elizabeth Stride was first.
Okay.
And what's really interesting, or, well, significant from your sources, is that she's noted as the only one of the 5 whose body didn't have those abdominal mutilations.
Really? Why?
Well, the sources say this led to a lot of speculation. Even back then, did the killer get interrupted somehow?
Wow, which makes the second victim that night, Catherine Eddowes, even more disturbing. Found later, different place. Your sources just use the word horrific for her mutilations. The contrast is chilling.
It really is. And then finally, Mary Jane Kelly, November 9th. She wasn't found on the street like the others. She was murdered in her room. Yes. And your sources emphasize this was, quote, most gruesome of all. Descriptions of extensive mutilation, the fact it happened indoors, the sheer level of violence. Your material really sets this one apart.
Reading about them in your sources, you just feel this immense sense of tragedy. They were so vulnerable, weren't they? Marginalized, just trying to get by in these terrible conditions. Their deaths really underscore that brutality.
It definitely highlights how the killer seemed to target those who were perhaps the most invisible, the least protected by society back then.
So, these terrible crimes happen. A huge police investigation kicks off. But as your sources point out, investigations were just fundamentally different then. The technology gap was massive.
Oh, huge. The material you shared really drives home those limitations. I mean, think about it. No DNA analysis. That's like the cornerstone of modern forensics. It just didn't exist.
Right.
And fingerprinting, it was kind of known, but your sources clarify it wasn't systematic, not used like we use it today.
Yeah.
So they were working with very basic tools, really reliant on witness accounts.
And getting witnesses to talk must have been hard.
Exactly. In a community like that, people might be scared or distrustful of the police. It was a real uphill battle.
But even with those difficulties, people did come under suspicion. Over the years, lots of names have been floated. Your sources mention a few specific ones.
Yes, the ones that consistently appear in the material. There's Montague John Druitt. He's noted as a barrister who disappeared right after the last murder, Mary Kelly's.
Okay. His timing looks suspicious.
Then your material brings up Aaron Kosminski, described as a Polish barber, apparently had mental health issues, and was later put in an asylum. Some police notes mentioned in your sources seem to point towards him, at least tentatively.
Interesting. And then there are later theories, maybe more speculative. Your sources mention Walter Sickert.
Yeah, the painter. That's referenced in your material, often linked to sort of conspiracy theories that emerged much later.
And even royalty gets dragged in sometimes.
In some of the, let's say, fringe theories mentioned in your material, yes. Prince Albert Victor, Queen Victoria's grandson, sometimes gets named, though that's generally seen as highly unlikely.
So you look at all these names mentioned in your sources, Druitt, Kosminski, Sickert, the prince.
Mm-hmm.
What's the bottom line, according to this material? Did they find him?
Well, that's the core issue, isn't it? Based only on the material you've shared with us, the answer is no. None of these suspects, or anyone else for that matter, has ever been conclusively proven to be Jack the Ripper. Your sources are clear. The case is officially unsolved.
Still unsolved. Okay, and then there's another really strange element to this whole thing, the letters. The ones supposedly from the killer.
Ah, yes, the letters. This adds such a layer of intrigue and confusion. Your sources highlight the Dear Boss letter specifically.
That's the famous one, right?
That's the one, sent to a news agency shortly after Annie Chapman's murder, then passed to the police. Its impact was massive because, as your sources state, it's the first time the name Jack the Ripper was used.
Oh, so the killer named himself. Or...
Well, that's the million-dollar question. The letter had these chilling details taunting the police. But, as your sources immediately point out, there was, and still is, huge debate about whether it was actually genuine.
hoax.
Many experts, according to your material, suspected it was a hoax right from the start. Maybe even written by a journalist trying to drum up newspaper sales, sensationalize the whole thing. It tells you something about the media frenzy at the time.
Definitely. So we might not even have the killer's own words.
Exactly. And your sources mention other letters followed, like the From Hell letter that came with part of a kidney. But their authenticity is also heavily debated. It just adds more uncertainty, doesn't it?
It really does. Okay, so let's step back a bit. We've looked at the time, the place, the victims, the investigation, the suspects, the letters. Why? Why are we still so gripped by this story all these years later? What do your sources suggest about its legacy?
Your material offers a few potent reasons, I think. One is simply the power of the unsolved mystery itself, right? A killer who terrified a city, committed these awful crimes, and then just vanished, never caught. That lack of an ending leaves so much room for imagination, for speculation.
That makes sense, the not knowing.
And perhaps, as your sources hint, it's also the window it gives us into that very specific world, Victorian London's East End. It forces you to confront the sheer poverty, the violence, the vulnerability that existed. It's a stark history lesson.
Yeah.
Plus, your material notes how Jack the Ripper himself has become this kind of cultural figure. He's inspired countless books, movies, TV shows, walking tours. He's moved beyond just being a historical criminal into something more like a modern myth.
A dark myth, for sure.
Yeah.
And your sources conclude it's still actively discussed, researched.
Absolutely. It remains a subject of genuine historical inquiry. Alongside all the speculation, people are still poring over the same limited evidence.
So that kind of wraps up our deep dive. Working through the material you shared on Jack the Ripper, we've covered the setting, the terrible fate of the canonical five, the immense challenges the police faced, the suspects named in your sources, those perplexing letters, and why it all still resonates.
Exactly. And as you think about everything we've unpacked from this material, consider that power of the unsolved. What is it about this particular case, as presented in these sources, that really sticks with you? Is it the mystery, the glimpse into the past? What's the question it leaves lingering for you?
Something to definitely ponder. Until next time.